Well, not at the moment. Not at the moment. We got a couple.
Please subscribe, like, and share. Whichever part of the planet Earth you're coming from, watching this video, thank you very much for coming in and supporting my channel. Anyway, let us talk something about what I've gone through years ago, where I kind of analyze, is it really all about cylinder flow, or is it about compression? And I'm going to give you the answer right now. It's a combination of both. You can't have one without the other, except if you're boosted. But normally aspirated, you need a decent amount of flow and a decent amount of compression, or just enough compression for the gasoline you're running, and you're going to be fine. Now, years ago we decided to run an NMRA pure stock Mustang. What that means is that we're limited to 500 lift camshaft, whatever duration we run, but there's no porting allowed if you run an aftermarket cylinder head, or if you run a factory cylinder head, they'll allow you to put big valves, porting, whatever needs to get done. Now, we attempted this class car, and we ran the new cylinder head back then, was a TFS twisted wedge head with a 9-to-1 compression engine or piston. We ran actually 1080, high 10s, low 11s. That is not bad for a 9-to-1 flat top, small 302, punched out 306. Now, that being said, we were very, very satisfied how it made that pretty quick, really. And eventually we decided to look at other aspects. Can we go faster with a cast iron head? Because at that point in time, at 9-to-1, putting an aluminum head, from a thermal standpoint, you're actually losing efficiency / horsepower. Now, if the engine was 11.5-to-1 or 12.5-to-1 or higher, 14-to-1, sure, an aluminum head would show a distinct advantage because of the fact that it is, with that much compression, the heat is more manageable from a combustion standpoint. Now, at 9-to-1, it is severely handicapped, and I've always believed since day one, when all these twisted wedge heads came out and all these other cylinder, the J302, well, that was one of the initial attempts by Ford to build an aftermarket aluminum head, and that was a disappointment. We call that sawdust casting because I would get them from the box and the combustion chamber would be all over the place. Thin in one head, thick on the other one. Wow, what a mess. And then TFS came into the picture. Excellent. Now, the TFS cast iron head and the Dart cast iron head was marginalized at that point in time. People didn't pay attention to it because the new thing was the aluminum head. But we ran very, very fast, and I'll give you 2 examples of what happened here at 9-to-1 compression. Now, when we ran high 10s to low 11s, we're approaching 120 miles an hour in that. It's a Mustang Coupe. No, it's a hatchback LX. There you go. And it weighed 2,900 or change. It wasn't really lightened. It just had a fiberglass hood. That was it. And bolt-ons. Well, truth be told, I had a set of 69 351 Windsor castings that I tried with two cars actually. Another one was another LX Mustang. Anyway, so we did a comparison. 9-to-1 aluminum head, TFS twisted wedge, high 10, low 11s. But the big question mark was, are we actually going to go faster with a cast iron head due to the thermal efficiency at 9-to-1? Remember, a 9-to-1 motor, or engine should I say, I don't know why everybody kept saying motor, a 9-to-1 engine with aluminum head, from a thermal standpoint, the engine thinks it's running about a full compression less, like 8-to-1, because it's not very efficient at that compression ratio. Now, when I get the 351 Windsor head, that's the same type of head that I ran when I won the Muscle Car Nationals. In fact, it was one of the first heads-up racing that started taking on all the circuits all over the United States. In fact, when I won that with my 67, that was the first small block win, because it was dominated by big blocks. Of course, big blocks would have more power due to the fact that they have the cubic inches. But mine was the first one that won that. The race was sponsored by Muscle Car Review magazine. It was going from state to state, and I won it here on the West Coast. Now, I ran a 351 Windsor head at that point in time with 194 valves and 162.5. I got as much as I can on the exhaust, because the Ford's got a horrible exhaust port, and when you put an oversized valve, it gives you more working, should I say, room to put a short side in it, which was missing on the Ford small block heads. Even on the Chevy small block, if you put a 162.5, a bigger exhaust valve, you're able to change the short side radius and take that to full advantage, and you'll pick up flow and everything else, and you'll have a functionally better cylinder head, as far as it's more thermally effective or efficient compared to aluminum head. Now, when I did that, eventually I took that intake port and I put a bushing on the, what do you call that, on the bump, push rod bump, and had that straight, and that picked up more flow and got progressively quicker again. Now, this is years ago, okay? By the time I put the doggone thing in there and we measured the combustion chamber volume, it was 62 to 63 with a TFS twisted wedge on a 351 Windsor, massively milled. Okay, because they have a lot of meat back then. All right, you can easily bore a block over 60 over, not like today's 10 casting 40, you're done. But back then there's a lot more meat, and we cut the heads where the 351 logo, when you put the deck side on the heads, it says 351 sideways there. It completely knocked the one off. Okay, and when it does that, you can also see a little witness tab on the corners, and that's about to disappear as well, and you know you're close to maximum. And I had ordered a bunch of 28,000, 27,000, 28,000 head gaskets back then, and a manufacturer that I found on the East Coast would make them for me, and I did. I bought several of them, and I used it on this particular engines. And by the time we have the deck, zero deck, milled the heads from a 9-to-1 306 to 10.5, 10.45, 10.5, just round off. That's a 1.5. And when you look at a 1.5 difference between two engines of equal build, you're probably going to look at 35, 45 horsepower more, because it's got a little bit more compression. Heat is power, okay? And when you put more compression, you will notice your car will respond much better. You know, and I've seen many times when you put aluminum heads on 9-to-1 302 blocks, they kind of like a little soft on the bottom, but you know, here you have the fallacy of the flow bench. A flow bench will look at a twisted wedge, early generation. You're probably looking at 275, 285, depends on somebody's flow bench. CFM at 28. When you look at a 351 Windsor, you're looking at 245. By the time I work with the big valves, I don't think you have much over 255, 258 at 28 inches of vacuum. Now, that is a significant difference between the aluminum head and a heavily reworked factory casting. You're looking at the 69 351 Windsor head that is milled big time, and the twisted wedge that is stock. You can see the difference in combustion chamber, and look at that side to side. The Windsor is a lot more compact from the severe milling that has happened in the modification process, and this is out the way it comes from the factory. At that time there's no CNC porting available, so you run it out of the box. That was what the rules stated. These are the two intake ports on the Windsor 351 on the left, and on this particular one I took off that push rod bend by sticking a bushing and running a smaller push rod, actually the 5/16 push rod. Okay, so that turn right there, restriction, is not there on that heavily modified piece. And there's a twisted wedge. You can just see where the superior flow comes from, as opposed to that. That's a lot tighter there, what you're confronted with. They're both on a 1262 Fel-Pro flange. Okay? Here we're looking at the 351 Windsor, much modified exhaust, and this is the TFS as cast. Well, this is ported already, but I didn't change really hardly anything out of it. The dimensions still basically bone stock. It's got ample short side, as indicative by that little bump there, and this one here looks streamlined but has hardly any short side. So it may look good streamlined on the roof there, but here is actually a much better design. So looks can fool you sometimes. Something changed on screen. Now I got a P-51 Mustang there. That's the type of P-51 that my dad flew in, oh my gosh, 1951 or 1950. As soon as he came out of the Air Force Academy, and he was trying to win my mother's heart, he would buzz the small town where they live, and it's P-51. This is right after World War II, 5 years after World War II. And he flew a P-51D, and he would go down and bus her hometown, and hopefully that impressed, well, I guess it impressed my mother. They got married, and here I am and my brother. Anyway, go back to racing. Well, this talkies, because since it's the holiday, I just wanted to sit down and have a little talk with everybody here, and hopefully share some of my experience with all of you. Anyway, I've always made the statement that when you're boosted, especially with a turbocharger or even a supercharger, you don't need to increase the displacement as much, because boost is your cubic inches. Stroke is cubic inches more than bore. You could stroke an engine and increase the displacement much faster than you would by increasing the bore size. Now, when you look at and trying to make more power, it's best to make more power to higher RPM. Displacement lowers the effective RPM. Boost makes power. Now, here we go. Why did I say that, and it's been repeated many times since then, you don't need to increase the stroke so much, because boost is your displacement. And here's my example. My first experience. Years ago, somebody bought my 427 small block Ford 4125 bore by 4-inch stroke is 427 inches. And come to think of it, and I stated a long time ago that, and I told the owner, I said, look, man, because midway through he says, hey Ben, I'm going to turbocharge this thing. Oh God, it's the wrong cubic inch to run effectively run a turbocharger. He goes, yeah, but everybody says you got to have to make that turbo work better with a lot more cubic inches. I said, well, yes and no. There's always a penalty. Like I always repeatedly say here, you don't gain nothing for free. Now, when he finally, basically, it's his money, his car, so I said, okay, let's build a turbocharged small block Ford, 427 inches with a TFSR. Wow, look at that. Anyway, so here I am, went through the process, and we took it to Harvey's Dyno in Whittier. And when I showed up there, he goes, oh, that'll be nice. Oh, first time. So Harvey, what a nice guy out there, man. His dyno capability is good. You know, he will not abuse your engine and blow it up and tell you, oh, you built a lousy engine. He's not one of those guys. He's very careful. He asked me where I want the RPM peak at, where the timing is going to be at. So I said, so and so. Anyway, when we did, after several pulls, we're at roughly 1,500, close to 1,600 horsepower and 15, 16 pounds of boost. I remember that, 15 or 16. So basically, 15 pounds, 16 pounds, and 1,600 horsepower at the back wheel. We could have gotten more out of it, but our pump to circulate through the water tank, our intercooler, from the back to the front beside the driver, the water pump gave out, so we had no intercooling, so we limited at 15, 16 pounds of boost with just whatever ice we got in the intercooler, sitting beside on where the passenger seat used to be. Anyway, so 1,600 horsepower is very impressive at low boost. Now we went to Las Vegas, and the doggone car went like 827 or 830, and it weighs about 3,500, 3,550 pounds, because of all steel cage, no lightning whatsoever, with just a steel hood, and all that plumbing and igloo beside all that stuff for the turbocharger, really weighed down the car. Anyway, a low 8-second pass at Las Vegas, it's pretty much a 7-second pass at sea level if you go to Bakersfield or whatever. Given that number, 1,600 horsepower, and it spun from start all the way towards near the end is when it finally hooked up. And I said to the owner, remember what I told you? It's got too much stroke, we have too much torque. He said, oh yeah, I saw that. We got to change that. And the driver then, he was going, oh my God, I can't handle this thing, man. It's all over skating. So he goes, what do you want to do, Ben? I said, well, let's take the 4-inch stroke out of it and knock it down to 3.5. Basically stock 351 Windsor stroke. So the effective displacement went from 427 to 380 cubic inch. That's a big drop. He goes, but it's going to cost me power. I told you before, it's not going to cost you any power, because the limiting factor would be the capability of the heads. more than the displacement. The displacement will give you the torque and at a lower RPM. This one will peak higher, and the head will be the deciding factor in how much power we're going to make. It's a TFSR with big valves in it. Anyway, so I put a Crowler billet crank in it at 3.5 inch stroke and a much longer rod. I think it was 6.5 or 6.550, something like that. My long rod, because it's going to be easier for it at RPM. So we went through the process of rebalance everything and came back and went straight to Harvey's dyno in Whittier. And he goes, "What do you guys change now?" I said, "I took the stroke out of it. Now it's from 427 inches to 385, I think, or 380 cubic inch." And he goes, "Oh, it'll be interesting. What do you think?" I said, "I think it's not going to cost us any power." He goes, "Okay." He kind of like agreed with me without saying so until he sees the number. Anyway, we kept it at 16 pounds of boost, 15, 16, no more than before, just to compare apples to apples. Anyway, after we're done, guess what happens? It's about 1200, 1400 higher RPM peak and the same horsepower at a lot less cubic inch. Went back to the track in Vegas, and this thing ran a 7-second pass because now it hooked up. And then it shifted a lot higher. I think it shifted 1500 higher RPM wise. Therefore, what I'm trying to say here is that boosts your cubic inches. And I remember my first impression with this thing is because when we used to race all the Grand Nationals and have 2 less cylinders, they're 231 to start with. They're running just as fast as supercharged, turbocharged nitrous, and they only normally aspirated 5.0 in the Grand National versus Mustang, and I was the only Lone Ranger doing this thing. And they go, "How come you're doing this normally aspirated?" I said, "Well, I love racing, but I want to learn more." Much respect to that, I guess, that I garnered from the competitors. Anyway, but I was having a tough time. I always had to play, what do you call that, starting line games. I try to burn everybody down because the intercoolers back then weren't as good, and they were on gasoline. Hardly anybody was on alcohol at that time, or E85 or whatever. So the more I can get them to put heat into their engines, the better I'm going to run, the slower they'll get. Anyway, so that's the story, and I always stated even then, RPM, RPM, RPM. And I had another call, one of my technical calls, and people call me to have a little bench racing talk. A lot of them, you know, to them it's worth the payment that I charge, because they want confirmation, or they want to know before they take a leap into some combination that it is indeed correct. Anyway, one guy called me up and said they increased the displacement on their engine, and they gained 10 horsepower over the last short stroke carburetor or stock stroke. So there are 10. There's a turbocharged Honda import. So they made a little bit more power by stroking the engine. Okay. So the guy's going, "But Ben, that runs counter to what you were saying before." I go, "Yep. Since they increased the displacement by putting a longer arm in it, I guarantee you their peak RPM potential drops significantly. So you give away 10 horsepower. They're making 10 horsepower more than you do. Okay? But they're shifting about 1,000 or more RPM less. Well, I think I'll take a 10 horsepower hit if I can rev 1,000 or 1,500 RPM more. See what you guys think. Because now you can gear down lower, you shift higher, so when you go to the next gear, you're a lot higher RPM and you keep pulling. As opposed to some, the lower RPM you turn and you shift to the next gear, the lower speed you're going to be at, you bog it down a little bit more. Okay, so I'll trade off a little bit of horsepower for the RPM. That to me is important. To put that in a proper perspective with Ford Windsors, when I went to a 4/170 stroke on the same camshaft, 280 at 50, 740 lift, I went from a 432, or is it 426? Okay, but 432. 4/170 and I think a 60 over block. But what happened there was I was shifting at 6,800 and that big arm 351 Windsor. Now when I knocked that sucker down to a 4-stroke, now I'm shifting 7,400 RPM. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 600 RPM more or higher. Eventually, by the time I got it all figured out, I was shifting at 8,000. 6,800 with the other one. 426 cubic inch or 432. Dude, I'm trying to recall here, but it's a big arm 351 Windsor. Then I went to a 4-inch stroke. Now it's a 408 or something like that. So now we're shifting at 7,800, 8,000 RPM. So 6.8 to 7.8 to 8,000. Between 1,000 and 1,200 RPM more. We actually went faster. The other one showed good ET at a low mile an hour and a quarter mile. And I think, what was the speed then? 139. Jameson Suarez in his red Mustang in this picture. Okay, it went to Las Vegas, 938. Oh yeah, it hit 149 one time. That was a freak run. But I never did it again. Whereas the same combination with a 4-stroke will go past that. It'll exceed 140 miles an hour. Just changing the stroke. And I bet you if we would have dynoed that thing with the same heads, it would have showed the same horsepower, a lot less mid-range torque, a lot more high RPM power here. So this is a torquey motor. This is, oh, actually my street car. 4/170 stroke. I used to come up to the line, brake torque at 1,500, just let off the pedal and mash the gas. And the car, my street car, would go 1030, 1020 through the muffler, NA, in 1990, 1989. I'd go that fast on a street car. Now, the same combination that I did for somebody else before, now we're shifting close to 8,000 RPM with that kind of combination. Okay, just taking the stroke out, it gives me a lot more RPM and a little quicker run. More mile an hour, which allowed me to gear it down a little lower. It didn't have as much, well actually, that stroker combination, 4/170 stroke, between 411 and 389, it didn't change anything. It ran the same. So I elected to go 411. It's easier on the transmission when trying to leave the line. But with a 4-inch stroke, I had to go down to a 456. That gave me a quicker offline because I get more gear reduction. And then the additional 1,000 RPM more. But anyway, that's just a lesson and a little talk in stroke and RPM potential. And I wish this guys would come up clear to you guys. I hope we all learn from each other. There's a little sit down talk, and I will touch bases on a manifold development that I did not that long ago for the 4.6 Mustangs. Okay, so please subscribe, like, and share to Ben Alameda. So keep this going. Good night.